Hi guys, welcome to Play into Kindergarten Readiness. Today is session 2. So we're going to start this video like we're going to start all the videos from here on out, talking about the 4 different strands. So there's language or pre-reading skills, math, experiences, and social skills. So we're going to get started with the language, and the topic we're going to talk about today is oral language development. So that, in a nutshell, is children's ability to understand words and the words they have in their vocabulary. So the words they can say and the words they can also understand. And very, very simply, this is the most simple subject I'm going to chat about with you for sure. Oral language development develops through talking with your children, talking and having conversations, and it really is that simple. But it's also amazingly important. In the kindergarten classroom, there's a 4,000 word difference between students. So students come into the classroom and some of them know 4,000 more words than others. So you might be thinking, well, why is that so important? Well, it's really important in the school environment for 2 reasons. The first is for reading, and the second is for comprehension, understanding what a child has read. So moving forward, when they're in the later grades and they're learning to read, children will be reading along, and let's say they're reading a sentence that says, I won the trophy, the king exclaimed. When they get to that word exclaimed, if a child has never heard the word exclaimed before, it's going to be very difficult for them to decode that word and to read that word. Whereas another child who's familiar with the word exclaimed might think, oh, that's a logical fit there, and they can read through it very smoothly and naturally. So that's an issue for reading, but also for understanding, for comprehension, reading comprehension, when you're understanding what you've read. So a child reads that sentence, I won the trophy, the king exclaimed. And if they don't know what exclaimed means, they are not familiar with it, then they have the issue of trying to interpret that sentence instead of just immediately understanding that, oh, the king exclaimed it. They are going to be thinking, well, what does that mean? Is he happy about it? Is he sad? Is he angry? What's with the king and the trophy? So it's super important. It's a super important skill for children to develop. And again, it's just done through talking. Now, that being said, having conversations with our little ones, just before I go on, having conversations with our little ones, it's kind of twofold. So first of all, once you understand the value and the important role you play in helping your child develop this vocabulary, there's a big shift. So we shift in how we're communicating with our children and what we're saying to them, how we're responding to them, the attention we're giving them, like with the details that we're providing them, and how we communicate with them. You can feel a shift once you realize how important it truly is. So it's kind of twofold. First of all, we're building their vocabulary, giving them this fabulous head start, but also they start to see how important they are. They start to feel even more so that they're really important little people, and that mommy or their teacher, if you're a preschool teacher, that they really value me. And it really builds their self-esteem, which is fabulous as well. So having those meaningful conversations and really giving our little ones time as we speak to them, fabulous. The second thing I wanted to chat with you about is rich vocabulary. So something we're calling rich words, really descriptive words, or not necessarily big words, but important words, or juicy words, they're sometimes called. So if a child says, oh, look, that cat is so fluffy, you can say, oh my goodness, that cat is extremely fluffy, you're right. And just simply adding in those little words there. So that's creating rich language for our children, so they start to learn increase their vocabulary. So I wanted to talk with you about 3 examples, 3 things to keep in mind as you're having conversations and you're going about your day. 3 ways to make developing rich vocabulary, increasing our children's vocabulary, super simple. So the first is what I just touched on. So extend what your child has said. So if your child is feeling frustrated that they have the blue cup, you can say, oh, you're so disappointed you have the blue cup. You would have much preferred the red one. So adding in those words to give words to what they're feeling. Or your child's outside and feeling a tree and says, wow, it's really bumpy. And you might extend that and say, you're right, the bark on that tree is really bumpy and rough. So you're giving them more words. You're giving them the word bark. You're giving them the word rough. You're increasing their vocabulary, but you're meeting them where they are because they're currently experiencing that tree bark. So you're just putting words to what they're experiencing to build their vocabulary. And I wouldn't go into details about what bark is, what purpose it serves. That can come later. You don't need to go too far with it. I find it's easy for me, and maybe you find this too, to really want to describe everything to our children. And it's important we rein ourselves in and realize they are little people and they have their whole life to learn. And our job right now is to give them these foundational skills. So their first experiences with things. They don't need to learn everything in one shot. We're just giving them the foundation so that they can build on later, because these experiences are going to continually come up and they can continually build on them. The second way to build rich vocabulary is to try to answer the whys. And again, this is not going to be possible all the time, but often try the best you can. And again, not technically, just meet them where they are and build that foundation for them so that later they can get to the technical stuff much easier. For example, my son has asked me, like, why do we have the sun, or what is the sun? And instead of me going, the sun is a burning ball of gas in the solar system, which would totally blow his mind, and he has no foundational knowledge about the solar system yet, or our planet Earth and how it's related in space. He doesn't know any of that yet. So instead of me blowing his mind with something he can't relate to, I try to think about what he does know and build on the foundation he currently has. So for example, I might say, oh, the sun's job is to keep us nice and warm. And it helps our plants grow because we're big into gardening. So he has a good foundation in gardening. So he knows that one of the roles of one thing that plants need is light from the sun. So that's one function of the sun that he can relate to. And then later on down the road, when we start building on that, he'll build on his knowledge of the sun. Having a little knowledge right now that keeps us warm, and plants need it. Plants grow food, like it must be really important to us. He has that knowledge, and then we'll build on that slowly. Yeah, so try hard to answer some of the whys. And a really great way to build rich language is through comparing and contrasting things, how things are the same or how they're different. It's a really great way to build oral language development. So if you're outside and you're looking at trees, you could say, wow, look how tall that tree is, and that one over there is so short. So comparing the two trees and giving words to what they're seeing. Or, wow, that tree is so wide, and look how thin and skinny this one is here. Again, giving words to what they're seeing so they can directly see what you're talking about, directly see the words that you're saying. So one other fabulous way, so those were the 3 examples, but one other fabulous way is through reading. That's a fabulous way to develop vocabulary, but there's actually a lot I want to say about reading. And give you some tips on how to make sure your little one's really getting the most when you're reading with them. So I'm going to save that for next week, but just know that reading is another fabulous way to build vocabulary. So just before we wrap this up, the last thing I want to say about oral language development is don't worry about the small errors. So children, when they're developing language, they're going to make small errors in words that they say. For example, my son still sometimes says, oh, him's dad has a truck. And him's is, of course, not correct. I would say, yeah, his dad has a truck. His dad does. And just correcting, slowly and carefully correcting that it's his and not him's. But I don't have to point it out necessarily. Just a gentle correction and moving on. And it will come with time. So many of these little errors, they just simply come with time and experiences. So, of course, down the line, if children are still having trouble with speech, then, there's lots of different avenues we can do to help. And sometimes direct modeling and repeating it does become necessary. But especially at the preschool age, it's just modeling the correct way to say it, not making them repeat it, things like that. So it just comes with time. Okay, moving on to math. Today we're going to talk about how math is everywhere. So I mentioned in the first video about mama guilt and keeping things nice and simple. So in that same spirit, I wanted to talk to you about how easy it is to give your children a foundation in math in everyday life. It doesn't have to be complicated. Keep it nice and simple. So as we go through these weeks, we're going to do counting, recognizing numbers, one-to-one correspondence. And as we go through these things, I provide you with activities and ideas for how to nurture these skills in our children. But there's also super simple ways to do it. So today I wanted to touch on each of those areas and give you an example of to hopefully get your mind sparked thinking about super simple ways you can also teach these skills with your children every day, because the more experience they have with it, the better. And it can be so simple. So for example, everyday life counting, hide and seek. When you're playing hide and seek with your little one, they count up to 10. They count up to 20 if they can before they come to find you. They hear you counting when it's your turn to hide, and they try to have a turn counting when it's their turn to hide. Perfect way to practice counting. Recognizing numbers. So recognizing numbers is seeing the shape of a 2 and saying 2, that's the number 2. A super easy way to practice this is when you're outside going for a walk through the neighborhood and you look at addresses and you point out the numbers on the addresses, or you play a game where you try to find them in order with your little one on the way to the park. You say, okay, let's try to find the number 1. Let's look for a 1. And you look at the address plates until you find a 1. And then, all right, we did it. Now let's try to find a 2. Super simple, but very powerful. The third area is one-to-one correspondence. So that is the skill of seeing one object and counting the number 1. So you have 5 buttons on your hand, and a child will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sounds simple, but I almost guarantee you if your child hasn't had practice with their skill, they're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, having just moved their hand 2 times. It's a skill that has to develop in little ones. And a great way to practice this is with the whole body. So you're going up the stairs and you count the stairs as you go. 1 step, 1, 2 steps, 2, 3, 4, 5 as you go up, and you count how many you have. When your little one gets really good at that, then they can start counting backwards. So you have 12 stairs and you start counting them backwards. 12, 11, 10 as you're going down them. Shapes is another area we're going to work on. And again, this is great when you're out walking through the neighborhood. You can look at street signs and things, or you're at the park and you can play games where you're like, run and touch a circle. And the circle could be like the tube, or a rectangle could be the stairs. Once you start knowing what you're looking for, you see them everywhere. There's shapes everywhere. So just keeping that in mind as you're playing is to sometimes throw in games like that. And patterning, the same idea. Once you start seeing patterns, you're going to see them everywhere. So one great way to practice patterning is setting the table. So fork, spoon, fork, spoon, fork, spoon. That's a pattern. Have your little one help you set the table. Nice, easy way to practice math every day. Okay, we're on to our third strand of getting outside, or experiences, which today is getting outside. You've already heard in this video, and if you follow my blog, you know that I love getting children outside. I love being outside myself. I think that it's good for our souls to be out into nature. And I think that it has so much to teach us when we're outside with our children. So many natural learning opportunities present themselves whenever you're outside. Things you didn't even intend to teach, the opportunities just arise. So we learn about, there's fabulous opportunities for language development when we're outside, fabulous opportunities to develop gross motor skills, climbing, pushing, rolling, jumping, and fine motor skills too, picking up little rocks or picking blades of grass or picking flowers, or gosh, I don't know, there's always seems to be opportunities where those little hands are busy. And also, being outside gives us the foundation for so many huge science concepts. And again, we don't need to get into the details about it. When our little one throws a rock into a puddle, we don't need to say, wow, look, you're learning about water displacement. We don't need to do that. They're just having that experience. So later, when they learn about those things, they have something to relate it to. They have that foundational knowledge. Super simple. Just let them play outside. A a couple things, well, one thing really that I do encourage is to do a garden with your children. Doesn't need to be anything big or elaborate. You can do just a little window box one where you just have some dirt and a couple flower seeds, or even just when you do like a cup and you put a single bean sprout in it or something. And I have lots of ideas on the blog, and I'll make a note to make sure that I link to that in the curriculum. I think I do already, but I'll double check. In the course book, I mean. So just different ways that you can do a little garden with your children, because there's so much learning that comes from that, so much fabulous vocabulary. They're learning cause and effect. They're learning sequential thinking. They're learning about step by step. They're learning first, then next. So much learning comes with just something as simple as planting a seed with your child. Plus, it's really cool, and it's really great for children to have that experience with how magical our world really is. Okay, finally, the fourth thing I wanted to chat about was socially. So social skills. In this course, I talk a lot about where to find experiences, these social skill development experiences with our children. But today I wanted to chat about creating them. Sometimes we live really rural, or we might not have a car, or whatever. For whatever reason, you might not be able to often go out and be with other kids. And that's okay. There's lots of ways we can create those social skill building experiences for our children. We can do it. We don't need other children or other adults to help us do it. We can actually do it ourselves. Of course, it's ideal if they have experience being with other children and being with other adults, so it's not a complete shock when they go to the classroom. But there are great ways to practice at home. So, for example, when we think about the skills we want our children to have in a kindergarten classroom, I came up with a few, a list here. So initiating play or making friends, sharing or taking turns. The difference between those, I'm not sure. I don't think I've talked about it yet. So sharing is when you're actually playing with the toy together, and taking turns is when I'm playing with it now, but you can play with it after. Both important skills. Getting help. So if they can't do something themselves, they're having trouble putting on their boots and they've tried and they can't, they need to be confident enough to ask for help when they need it. Waiting is a really important skill that so many little kindergartners are practice all year long, is waiting. Saying no if they don't like what a friend is doing, if they don't want to play what that friend is doing, if whatever. There's so many situations, and you want them to feel secure enough to say no if they need to say no. And then following instructions. So a kindergarten teacher might say, okay, we're going to put our shoes on, put our lunch bag in our cubby, and sit on the carpet. So that's 3 things for them to do in a row. And if little ones haven't had experience with that, it might feel overwhelming. So to make sure we're giving them those practice with that. So when we're at home, we might say, okay, take your coat off, put your shoes away, and sit at the table for lunch. And try to encourage them to independently follow those 3-step directions. And it just comes with experience and with time. So the social skills I'll be talking about each week, about different places we can find them, different things to consider to help grow your child, their social skill development as well. So that's it for this week. Next week, I'm going to talk to you about reading, how to make sure you get the absolute most out of it, and ensure you know how very, very important it is. We're going to talk about counting, ways to teach our little ones to count, why it's important, and different ways to play with that skill. And we're going to talk about fine motor skills, so strengthening those little hands, really important for future writing and for so many other things as well, and different ways to play with that to make sure their hands are nice and strong as they're starting kindergarten. Okay, that's all for today. I'll see you next week. Bye.